listener production. Hi, I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. Welcome to this episode of The Briefing. Notorious drug kingpin Tony Mokbel has been handed a major win this week. A judge has ruled his lawyer, Nicola Gobbo, conspired with Victoria Police more than a decade ago to put him behind bars. Gobbo made a name for herself during Melbourne's notorious gangland wars in the early 2000s, when she represented a number of high-profile criminals, including murdered gangster Carl Williams and Mokbel himself. In 2019, she made headlines when it was revealed she was Lawyer X, a police informer who deliberately leaked confidential information about her criminal associates, many of whom were her clients. Justice Elizabeth Fullerton, who was flown in from New South Wales to make the decision to avoid conflicts of interest within the Victorian justice system, handed down findings this week, saying she was satisfied that Gobbo and members of Victoria Police had perverted the course of justice. And this represents a big boost for Mokbel's appeal, as he asks for his 26-year sentence for drug trafficking to be overturned. So, what are the chances the gangland identity will soon be walking free? And does this ruling impact any other sentences currently being served by some of the most notorious criminals in Australia? Joining me now is Adam Shand. He's a veteran journo who has been covering Melbourne's gangland wars since they began and once counted Carl Williams among his recently called list on his phone. Adam, welcome to The Briefing. Let's start by painting a picture of who Tony Mokbel is and why he's described as one of Australia's most notorious criminals.
Well, Tony Mokbel was a very prolific drug manufacturer and distributor in Melbourne who teamed up at a time when Melbourne was the party drugs capital of the world. It was booming down here. He teamed up with Carl Williams, another notorious drug trafficker who liked to kill people. So in this enterprise where they were cornering the market, Tony Mokbel became Drugs Inc. and Carl Williams was Murder Inc. And the entrails of that story are still being worked out today. It's still washing through the halls of power, this one.
Yeah, well, and that's what we're here to talk about. And we will get into all the interesting developments that we've had come through this week. But I also want to touch on who Nicola Gobbo is. Now, she came to represent some of the most high-profile underworld figures, including Carl, including Tony, during the gangland wars in the early 2000s. What have we learnt about her since that?
Well, we've learnt this story that we had a criminal lawyer, a barrister, who changed sides effectively and began to inform on her clients to the police. I've got a different view, having dealt with her over many, many years and seen her in action. I think she was a crook who became a lawyer. She was involved in drug traffic in Carlton with her boyfriend much earlier than this. In the end, she gave up him as well, not once but twice. Funny what love will make you do. And so she came into this world with a keen understanding and many criminal associates, while at the same time having many police associates. She liked to drink and smoke and hang out with coppers. And I think people like Carl Williams, who I knew quite well back then, he was concerned that she was a double agent, but at the same time, he was getting information from the police through her. So it was a Geordian knot that was only ever going to get tighter and tighter. It's remarkable that they didn't see the disaster ahead.
And I guess could you quickly recap as well for us when Nicola Gobbo was named as Lawyer X, which happened in 2019. What was the immediate fallout from that we learnt at the time?
Well, this was a triumph of journalism, plain and simple. All the institutions of Victoria combined to keep her secret, her identity secret, and to for us to not know the extent of what was going on. Some brave journalists on the Herald Sun, Anthony Dowsley, Patrick Carlyon, and another journo, Adrian Tame, broke this story over a period of time, and they had to go up against the full weight of the law to do so. And we saw the institutions being dragged to Jesus on this point, till finally there was a royal commission, which, as I predicted back in the day when it started, there would be no prosecutions out of it. And there has been none, as this extraordinary disaster played out. And the spectacle of former senior officers of Victoria Police refusing to answer questions, having to be refreshed from documents they said didn't exist. It was one debacle after another, but no one's been charged. So we still have, on behalf of the community, some time to run on this saga where there is going to be some justice.
Yeah, so that brings us to this latest ruling. What does it mean for Mokbel's conviction, and could he soon be released?
Well, Justice Fullerton has said the use of Nicola Gobbo as an informer against her clients meant that she was involved in a joint criminal enterprise with Victoria Police. That's pretty stunning. That goes right to the heart of perceptions of integrity of our system. So we now see the possibility of Tony Mokbel and others having their cases re-looked at. Mind you, we've been saying this since 2019, that the doors of the jails would be thrown open and they would walk free. Hasn't happened. 2 max at the moment, maybe 3 with Tony Mokbel. I think he should have a real shot at getting his case overturned because it relied so heavily upon Nicola Gobbo's testimony and cooperation. And it was never revealed to either Tony Mokbel or his counsel, as it should normally be in a just criminal proceeding. And this is where the allegations of perversion of the course of justice and this joint criminal enterprise come in. It's a stinging rebuke. He's already in the midst of an appeal, and it will be up to the powers that be to decide whether or not the involvement of Gobbo as an informer against him prejudiced his basic legal rights to a fair trial, where you have to know all the evidence against you. Otherwise, you end up with the Franz Kafka situation, the trial. You don't know what the allegations are, who the witnesses are. And that's what the involvement of Gobbo subjected our legal system to, a Kafkaesque corruption of the way things should have run.
So does this ruling then, because you're right, when the Lawyer X scandal first broke and we had the Royal Commission and it came to be revealed just how much Nicola Gobbo had been informing on her clients and the role Victoria Police played in that as well. I mean, what does this week's ruling change about that?
Well, let's not be naive. There's a long history of lawyers cooperating with police. Clients come and go, the police are always there. So there's always close networks between those. It was ever thus. But to see it so egregiously done, with so little regard to the consequences, where even the Chief Commissioner did not seek legal advice before doing this, it's unbelievable. It's like a bunch of guys were sitting in a car headed for a cliff, looking at the scenery, forgetting no one was steering. This was so inevitable. And it, as I say, took great journalism to bring it out, and very courageous journalism, because the whole system did not want to be exposed. And it's still fighting. It's still fighting against reform and full disclosure, which is just not acceptable any longer, if it ever was.
Look, you are clearly quite passionate about how the justice system should work, and fair enough. But there'd be people who would argue the other case where at the end of the day, these people were criminals and openly flaunting that criminality. So, the argument that we need to, bring more of this to light, or that people should be held responsible, I mean, that doesn't impact the fact that these men are criminals and should be behind bars, right?
Well, that's a moral argument, possibly a legal argument. I just think it was a dumb decision. What you had was Carl Williams in jail with a range of his assassins who he had made down payments on various killings. Therefore, if they'd been more patient and waited, because Carl didn't pay his assassins. Big mistake. If you go in that business, make sure you pay off your deals because they'll come back to you. So in the end, all those informers did give evidence against Carl. It wasn't just because of Nicola Gobbo. So there's never an excuse for the police to cut corners like that. It's never an excuse. And rank and file detectives who weren't involved in this were absolutely appalled, because here's the thing, they always need to use informers. Informers are like manure. You get great results, but no one wants to handle them, unfortunately. And this is a classic example of it. We do need informers, because how else are police going to crack these networks where it's an arms race of technology, of lawyers and so on and so forth? In Victoria, justice is what you get when you run out of money at the moment. It shouldn't be like that. It should be that the police use the system correctly. But I do need to see informers used correctly, because they will bring cases to closure. And the evidence is so overwhelming that the state is saved the expense and trouble of a trial when a guilty plea comes. So definitely I'm all in favour of a sledgehammer to crack a walnut here. But the way it was done was just bizarre and almost obscene.
As far as you're aware, are things like this still happening, or was this I know you said, we always use informers and lawyers always have relationships with police, but this is a very specific case of very high-profile criminals as well. Is this still happening? Have we learnt the lessons of the Lawyer X scandal?
No, we haven't, in short, because we haven't gone through the pain of prosecutions. The Director of Public Prosecutions has been incredibly coy about pushing this forward. And I think there was even a talk of having another investigation, another independent investigators to avoid making these decisions. So really, we need to see heads roll. We need to see high-ranking police of that era stand before the courts and explain it where they do not have the luxury of not answering the questions. I think that's a really important part of this. I think it will always happen. There's probably somewhere a solicitor right now thinking about his interests against his own client and thinking about tomorrow. A guilty plea is much easier than a contested trial where you piss the cops off, frankly. So, I think it will always happen because these are human beings and they always fall to convenience and expediency when it comes to these matters. And this was all about expediency. The cops back in the day, unfortunately, were losing the war. Carl was knocking off people faster than they could bury them. And so they needed a silver bullet, and Nicola Gobbo was that. But it was a very, very poor piece of thinking, and it really demonstrated how rattled they were at the time. And I think it's really time for Victoria Police's leadership of today to grasp the nettle, because they didn't do this. They didn't put this in train. But I think it's now time to demonstrate to the public that we've learnt from these lessons, as you say, and we'll move forward. I mean, listen, it's never going to be perfect. This is cleaning out the Aegean stables. If you remember that analogy, you get to the bottom, there's just more of it. That's the nature of crime. But I think where there's public perceptions of lack of integrity, it's pretty dire.
So ultimately, was this ruling this week a good thing for the justice system?
A very good thing. And it's interesting that it took a judge from outside of Victoria, from New South Wales, to actually get onto this and speak the truth that those down here are quite afraid of. I mean, this is like pulling on the little thread of the tapestry and seeing the whole thing unravel before your eyes. It should have happened a couple of years ago. It's still to happen. And I think this ruling is incredibly significant. The police have been involved, according to this judge, in a joint criminal enterprise. Wow.
Adam Shand, thank you so much for talking to us today. Such an interesting chat and such interesting implications on our justice system as well. Thank you.
My absolute pleasure.
That was journalist Adam Shand speaking with me there. And if you are interested in learning more about the Lawyer X saga, Adam has covered it extensively on Listeners Crime Insiders podcast. Just search it wherever you're listening to this. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That is it for now. Before you go, we would love it if you could share this ep with someone you think might enjoy it. It is a really easy way you can support us and all we do here at The Briefing. So is sharing our socials posts. Check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and on TikTok and YouTube. Search Listener Newsroom. I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. See you next time.